Net. Joining us now in the studio, Mr. John White, the owner of Two Gun Tactical. Morning, John.
Good morning, Gerard. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for coming in the studio. I wanted to have you come in today and give us your thoughts about this gun control legislation that is kind of making its way through the U.S. Congress. It just seems like the Democrats are bound and determined, it feels like, to eliminate, confiscate every gun and do away with the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and I don't understand that at all, especially when, 65% of Democrats own firearms.
Wow.
And over 50% have owned firearms for 10 years. So to me, that's just a sneaky way to take our Second Amendment right away, and the people with the guns have the power. So it keeps them in power.
It just seems like that society at large always pays the price for a sliver of the population, and I mean a minute sliver, who are just fools and have some issues that cause them to act in a violent way. I just don't see how this has anything to do with guns and the Second Amendment. And if you look in particular at the legislation that they're proposing, I believe it's passed the House, making its way over to the Senate, I don't really see how that changes anything. I mean, if somebody is bound and determined to go commit some sort of heinous gun crime, I believe they're going to figure out a way to do it. Background checks or laws, you can't legislate that.
That's right. The good guys are the ones that come and buy legal firearms and get training and do it legally with background checks. They're not the ones that are out there committing these crimes. Less than 1% of all crimes in America that happen with legal guns. So the rest of it's illegal firearms that are out there.
And you got to believe the more you try to legislate the legal ownership and transfer and acquisition of firearms, the more you try to, the harder you make that, I believe that energizes the underground market even more.
Absolutely, especially when they're saying they want a background check to sell an individual to sell a firearm to another individual. That just lets start people buying guns from individuals, and individuals that have a lot of firearms or a few firearms they want to get rid of, they're getting rid of them now before this background check thing comes in.
What are you hearing about this, John? Do you think this thing has a chance in the Senate? I believe it would require 60 votes as it stands right now. Do you believe that there is, an appetite for that? If it would require all of the Democrats and 10 Republicans to peel off. Do you feel like the Republicans are standing pat on their support for the Second Amendment?
I hope so. I think so. I think our Republicans are going to stand by on this Second Amendment. They understand that it's not the good guys with the gun that commits the crime. So I'm looking for it to stay like it is. I don't think it's going to go through.
Yeah. In your crystal ball, John, do you see anything that might be coming down the pike to help protect society against these crazy sorts of mass killings, like we saw last week in Atlanta? That individual just seems to have mental problems, as I believe is the case with almost all these people that commit these ridiculous mass shootings. It's not, I don't know if you could even call them hate crimes. I just think they've got some sort of short circuit in the brain. Do you see anything coming that might help us protect and perhaps warn against that?
I see a lot of training happening right now. Our classes are full a month in advance, from basic pistol for people just never fired a firearm to those that want more advanced training. And that's what I see coming. I see people that, kind of like myself, 5 years ago, I was comfortable with a firearm, maybe in my truck, maybe close by, but now everybody knows that they need to push up their training, and they need to be able to protect themselves, especially when you look at things today. Firearms are used 80 more times to protect a life than they are to take one. So a couple 100,000 times a year, people pull a firearm and don't use it, but it stops the crime. You've got to put that into play somewhere.
And wasn't that kind of the underlying intent of the Second Amendment anyhow, for people to protect themselves?
That's exactly right. I think it goes further than that. I think when they said the First Amendment was freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, then they said, well, how are we going to protect those freedoms? And somebody said, we got to have guns. So that was the number two thing on their mind there.
Yeah. And I don't know. It just seems like the more government tries to get involved in this sort of with some sort of moral objective, they always mess things up, whether it's the war on drugs or the war on poverty and the war on guns. It just makes things worse when they get involved and try to do that. Yeah,
well, you take any process that the government has taken over and see if they've been successful with it, and they haven't.
Yeah. It's disturbing to see the power grab and the attempt to advance this legislation through, and I know this is high on their list, unfortunately. Tell us about, John, the demand and supply of guns and ammo. How's that looking right now?
Well, they're getting a little bit easier to find than they were 4 or 5 months ago. We're seeing ammunition come around in bigger orders in bulk. But the demand for firearms is skyrocketed. We have people coming in, and I mean young people, old people, different races, different ethnicities, from different backgrounds. Everybody's saying, hey, we need a firearm to protect ourselves. And they're exactly right.
You wonder, John, when you see this continuous play of video on all of our news media showing all the unrest and chaos in our streets. Haven't seen as much, thank God, in Mississippi, but certainly across the landscape of America's suburban areas and larger cities. How much does that influence, I wonder, people that say, I better go get something to protect myself here?
It absolutely affects people. With this unrest that has been going on in our society, with COVID and other things, the change from a Republican president to a Democratic president, our gun sales have been sky high. Starting last Thursday, we've had 3 record days at Two Gun Tactical, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, on gun sales, ammunition, as well as training.
Do you feel like you're benefiting from this extra money they're throwing at people? All the stimulus money?
Yes. We have people come in and they'll tell you, hey, I got a check for X amount, and this is what I'm going to spend today.
So think about that. You got the same party who really went to the wall to make sure they got this money out to people is the same one that's trying to stop really the free sale and the free exchange of firearms. And they send this money out, which causes people to go buy guns.
Yeah, and lots of them. Lots of them.
That is, I think that's just par for the course there when you look at government and their unintended consequences, as they say, and their sort of misguided goals. Okay, we got to get all this money out, but we got to stop the sale of guns, and we got to make it harder to obtain one. And all they do is go out and take the money, and just as you're saying, John, your demand is off the chart.
Yeah, and those are legal firearms too.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the good thing. 93% of guns used in crimes are obtained illegally. So why aren't we going after the criminals instead of going after people like us that have bought a firearm legally, that are carrying it legally, got our permits legally? It's just making it harder for us in the gun business to sell an American a firearm.
Unbelievable. And certainly if you're defunding law enforcement, that kind of dilutes your ability to go really do something effective against the illegal trade of guns. That's another thing that kind of conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you going to defund the police? And if you do, who's going to protect you?
Makes no sense.
None.
Makes none whatsoever. So you got, what about ammo? I know you touched on that a second, but I'm hearing from a lot of folks that ammo is still kind of hard to come by. Is that true? It's getting better?
It is. It's getting better. So we had a huge shipment come in the other day. We had 100,000 rounds of 9mm come in, which is really good for us. We're still short on some. They're catching up. We're seeing it pop up. It's not at the prices it used to be.